I'll just ask our audience a question, first of all. If you'd raise your hands. How many of you believe in God? Okay, a forest of hands. So, Richard Dawkins, these people are deluded. Every single one of them.
Well, I fear that's right, yes. I would say it's rather like the phenomenon of the imaginary friend that children have and that comfort them and console them. But there's actually not the slightest shred of evidence that any kind of supernatural being exists.
So it's exactly the same thing as a kid with an imaginary friend. There's not a single shred of evidence that even suggests that any sort of supernatural being exists. So let's think about that for a few minutes. I never had an imaginary friend, but I suppose he's right. A child makes up an imaginary friend in order to fill some deficiency in their situation in their life. If they feel like someone doesn't listen to them, for example, they'll make up a person who will always listen to them and so forth. These children have not examined evidence and come to a conclusion. They have willfully and knowingly concocted a person to meet that need. Dawkins here says that people did the same thing with God. And mind you, Dawkins is not basing that conclusion on any evidence. He wasn't there when the first person did this, so he doesn't have a single shred of evidence for this, but he states it as fact, rather smugly and confidently. He claims that at some time or another, some person wanted something to comfort them, and so they just made up a God in heaven. In the case of the Judeo-Christian faith, it was a God who created them and the whole world and then cursed them to die for disobeying him. That doesn't sound very comforting to me. Who makes up an imaginary friend like that?
So I'm sorry to say, deluded, yes.
Deluded.
On their own, children grow to see them as imaginary. Another difference is that no adult suddenly starts believing in them. But that is not true of belief in God. Many people who have never before believed in God do come to faith as adults.
How can so many people be wrong?
Well, there was a time when everybody believed that the world was flat. There was a time when everybody believed that the sun whizzed round the earth. People are very, very frequently deluded.
So people are wrong about God because people have been wrong about things in the past. That's his argument. How do you know people are deluded about God? Because they made him up without a shred of evidence. How could they have done that? Well, people have done it in the past. But people didn't just make up the theory that the world was flat like someone makes up an imaginary friend. According to all their observations, the world must have been flat. The world appeared to be flat. They came to that conclusion based on evidence. So evidence can be wrong, but only Christian evidence, according to Dawkins. The Christian says, I have evidence that God exists. Dawkins says, rubbish, you don't have a shred of it. Well, how do you know I don't have a shred of it? Because you made him up like an imaginary friend. Well, how could I have done that? The same way people made up the idea that the world was flat. This is not proper logic. And mind you, the YouTube channel that made this is titled it The All-Time Best Arguments Against Religion. Makes you wonder if the one posting it has a proper understanding of the words best and the words argument.
And by the way, of course, there was a time when people believed in Zeus and Apollo, and in other parts of the world they believed in Thor and Wotan. People have believed in fairies and leprechauns. Everybody in this room, I would guess, knows what it's like not to believe in the God of some other religion.
It's the you theists are atheists in regard to every other God. We atheists just go one God further argument. But we need to check that syllogism.
There are thousands of gods you don't believe in. What makes yours any different?
So for this to be an argument against the existence of God, like the title claims that it is, then there has to be a conclusion that says that God does not exist. So in other words, whatever he says could reasonably be followed by, therefore God does not exist. In its current form, the argument goes like this. There are thousands of gods that you don't believe in. What makes your God any different? Therefore, God does not exist. Okay. So, Hamad, to start, you got to check your premises, bro. Because, if you're going to make an argument, you got to at least make sure that the conclusion follows from the argument.
You know that if you happen to be born in the Middle East, you'll probably be Muslim.
This is the genetic fallacy that the origin of a truth statement either proves or disproves its validity.
Christian because you were brought up here.
Excuse me? You want to say, rewind that one. Wind that one by me one more time, that last sentence.
That you're only...
Come on, give it to me, bud.
That you're only Christian because you were here, born here, or in
How on earth do you know that? How on earth do you know that the only reason I'm a Christian is because I was born in the United States?
It's not an attack on your belief.
How do you know what you just said?
It's an assumption.
It is so judgmental, it's scary. I would never treat you that way. That is so disrespectful to do what you just did. You don't have the faintest idea why I'm a follower of Christ.
But isn't it a statistical problem? I mean, forgive me. If that's not true, I apologize.
You better apologize. That's off the wall rude. I don't have the faintest idea why you believe what you believe. And for me to assume that you believe whatever it is you believe, because you were born in the home you were born in, is so judgmental. It's incredible. You don't know that.
Oh.
And I don't know that. I don't know why you believe what you believe.
Were you brought up Christian?
Was I brought up Christian?
That is pretty pertinent to your belief.
The environment I grew up in was Fairfield County, Connecticut. Go check out the environment.
Okay, but...
I'll tell you what, you want to know what God is in Fairfield County, Connecticut? Money. My buddies go to Wall Street, okay? I can promise you, Jesus is not Lord in Fairfield County. The American dollar is.
Okay, but can we agree that it is a great chance that you happen to be in the United States and not someone growing up in a region of China, for instance, separated from the knowledge of Christ?
Why does that matter? There's more Christians in China than the United States.
Sir, there are going to be more followers of Christ in China than in any other nation in the world in the next 5 to 10 years.
Right.
It's because of conversion, sir.
Yes.
All right?
They're exposed to that knowledge.
Mao Zedong did one whale of a job suppressing the organized church. The underground church exploded. Not because the culture said, hey guys, let's all believe in Jesus. No, the culture said, you believe in Jesus, you better watch out, we're coming after you to kill you. And millions upon millions of Chinese people said, I am sorry. The evidence is Jesus Christ is Lord, and they put their faith in him. Not because mommy and daddy told them to, not because the government told them to, and not because the culture told them to. The culture and mommy and daddy and the government told them the opposite.
And people who are born in the Middle East believe equally fervently in their God. They can't both be right. There are so many different gods that people have believed in throughout history.
Just because every other answer is wrong does not mean there's not a right answer. In regard to the shape of the earth, there were plenty of other theories floating around, competing with each other about that. Some theories were that the earth was on the back of a giant turtle. It was nestled in the coil of a great cosmic serpent. It was carried on the back of a giant named Atlas. Does that mean that the earth isn't round and suspended in space? Of course not.
So what people believe is really an accident of geography.
Exactly right, yes.
Where was the center of Christianity in the first century? Jerusalem, Palestine. Where did the center of Christianity move? Up to Antioch, Syria, down to Egypt. Then where did the center of Christianity move?
You think no people...
Western Europe. Then where did the center of Christianity move? Good old US of A. Now, today, where is the center of Christianity? It's in Africa, South America. And within the next 5 to 10 years, where will the center of Christianity be? China. There will be more followers of Christ in China than anywhere else in the world. Sir, I can promise you, faith in Christ is not a cultural bias. Faith in Christ is a deeply personal decision, and the center of Christianity is not in one spot. It's moved all around the world.
Friedrich Nietzsche famously said that God was dead, and Sigmund Freud can be rendered as having said that God was dad. And I think both of them are probably right. The concept of God is like everything else in our vocabulary, man-made. It's an invention of human beings.
So here Hitchens is basically making the same argument as Dawkins. God is a man-made invention. Well, how do you know that? Because Nietzsche said God is dead and Freud said God is dad. Because man has invented other things, man invented God. That's not proper logic. I don't know why this YouTube channel decided to post the same argument twice.
Unless you take the view that God made us, in which case it'd be a lot to explain. Why did we in that case make so many gods?
Again, the very same argument. Man invented many gods, therefore your God was invented. That's also not proper logic.
It does seem to be very much more probable that men and women made many gods than that any one God made all men and women and the rest of creation.
How is that more probable? It's more probable, he says, that man made many gods than that one God made all men and all of creation. Is it more probable that man made many theories about the shape of the earth than that there is one true shape of the earth?
And as well as being man-made, it's fear-made. It is the unexpressed or partially expressed wish for a protector, a parent, someone who will never desert you, someone who will do in a way you're thinking for you, especially on questions of moral philosophy. At its best, it's that. It's a wish to be loved more than you probably deserve.
Well, there he goes again with the same argument as Dawkins. Man wanted a protector, so invented a God that created everything and then cursed man to die in that creation for disobeying him. Right.
And at its worst, it's the underdeveloped part of the human psyche that leads to totalitarianism.
Totalitarianism was Hitchens' favorite word.
That wants to worship and that wants a boss, that wants a celestial dictatorship.
Does that really jive with human nature? It seems to me to be the opposite. Humanity has always wanted to shed the bonds of celestial dictatorship. Wasn't that what the Odyssey was all about? It just doesn't seem human to me to make up a God who will tell you what to do and punish you if you don't do it. Why would a kid make up an imaginary friend for that purpose?
And that's the bit that's now threatening to destroy our secular civilization.
And it's destroying our secular civilization, he says. We built this whole civilization against that, he says. Against the idea of a God who tells us what to do and promises to punish us if we don't do it. So apparently there were some humans, including Hitchens here, who were not prone, humanly prone, Hitchens says. It's a mark of human nature to invent a God that will tell them what to do and punish them if they don't. It's as human and as natural as apple pie, he says. So human and natural that it thoroughly disproves the existence of God as a man-made concoction. It's just what humans do. But Hitchens doesn't do that. He's superhuman.
And so you're quite right to start where you do. It used to be believed, the number of gods now it's infinite, and a new god is created almost every day by some cult or other. But it used to be that. There was a belief that gods were in the trees, in the woods, in the springs, in the sea, in the clouds, and so forth. Polytheism of a kind. Then something a bit more polytheistic, like Olympus, where there was at least a location for the divine, but it was multifaceted. And then monotheism, getting it down to one. So I regard this as progress of a sort, because they're getting nearer the true figure all the time.
Again, with the many gods argument, these all-time best arguments against religion are just the same faulty arguments over and over again, said in different accents and higher levels of smugness and indignation.
I actually... Why shouldn't there be something? As you say, if there wasn't, then we wouldn't be here. But the question, why is there something rather than nothing? The origin of the something, the origin of the cosmos, was, I suspect, an extremely simple event.
So something from nothing is a more simple explanation than something from someone.
And simple events are very simple to understand and explain. Once upon a time, not that long ago, a couple of centuries ago, the question would not have been, why is there something rather than nothing? The question would have been, why is there all this magnificent life? Why are there trees? Why is there grass? Why are there birds? Why are there humans?
He's basically mincing words here. The question, he says, is not why is there something rather than nothing, but why are there some things rather than nothing? Why are there particular things instead of nothing?
Darwin answered that question and blew out of the water the theistic answer to that question. Theists are now driven back to this much, much more simple question. Why is there something rather than nothing? Everything else is either explained or well on the way to being explained. We're left with just one little tiny smidgen of a gap in which God is alleged to be to be hiding.
So there are some particular things rather than nothing, therefore God does not exist. And he says we can explain these particular things, where they come from, and they came from nothing. So because everything came from nothing, God does not exist. But that's begging the question, how can something come from nothing? Because something can come from nothing, he says. How can something come from nothing? Because something can come from nothing. And there are competing theories about how this something came from nothing. Does that mean that something didn't come from nothing? In the same way that the fact that there were and are competing theories about God means that God does not exist?
But even if you invoke a supernatural creator to explain why is there something rather than nothing, you still explained absolutely nothing because you're left without an explanation for that God himself.
The who created God argument.
One of the central arguments of the God delusion, Richard Dawkins' book, is the famous schoolboy argument. If we believe in a creator, we'll have to ask who created the creator. Now, the first point I would make about that is this. If you ask the question, who created God, you are thinking of created gods. Now, the ancient world knew all about created gods. Actually, we call them idols. And people don't believe in them usually nowadays. So if Richard Dawkins really thinks that what he's demolishing is belief in created gods, then good for him. But he could have written a far shorter book, because millions of us don't need any convincing that created gods are a delusion. So that's the first point. And I believe it's quite a serious point, actually. Because if he thinks that the God means you must be able to say who created God, then he does fall foul of that criticism. Now, you can only ask the question, coming at it from another perspective, if you cannot conceive of an eternal God. Christianity, of course, does not believe in a created God. It believes in God who is eternal and is the creator of everything else. In other words, God is uncreated. So what I'm claiming, to use mathematical language, is that the category of the uncreated is not empty. Now, it could be that Richard Dawkins has difficulty with the notion of the uncreated. Although, and I'd like to know the answer to this, I don't know the answer to this, does he believe that matter and energy have existed forever? Because if he does, as many people do who are atheists, then they do believe in something eternal. So the problem must be that they can believe in something eternal, but they don't believe in an eternal person, an eternal God. But where's the logical difficulty? If you admit that something eternal exists, then postulating that an eternal person exists. On the other hand, if they believe that matter and energy are finite, we can ask them their own question, who created that? And who created whatever created that, and so on. You have an infinite regress unless you can see that the buck must stop somewhere. And of course, the Christian doctrine is that God existed eternally, so that by definition, the creation buck, so to speak, stops there. So I really think that in a way, the game is given away by asking that question. Dawkins is thinking of created gods, which are a delusion.
Every second that we're speaking, a star the size of our sun or bigger goes out, blows up or goes out. That's been the case every single second since the first moment of the Big Bang.
It seems weird. Every moment there is a sun somewhere dying, and that has been happening since the Big Bang happened. How does he know that? Not only is it this way, but that it has always been this way. How does he know that?
It's a lot. That'll be a lot of suns going out as we speak. And there's a lot of annihilation, isn't it? There's a lot of destruction. It's a rather what you might call almost a wasteful scale. It does have the positive outcome, though, that we are all constituted of those materials. We are made of stardust.
We are made of stardust. Where does that come from? The Bible, perhaps, where God says he formed man from the dust of the ground?
Now, I find that a rather more majestic and wonderful and even beautiful idea than, say, the idea of the burning bush. A bit more impressive, gives you more to think about.
Are they mutually
Also
exclusive?
Also has the
Are they
virtue-
mutually exclusive?
Well,
Did God make you a stardust?
One has the virtue of being true and provable and studyable, which the other doesn't. And I do think that the verifiability of something is a virtue.
One is provable and studyable, he says, and the other is not. So theology then, as an academic discipline, simply does not exist. It's a non-thing, like everything that existed before anything existed. The study of an infinite, eternal, all-powerful being that exists beyond our time and space isn't elegant and can't be done, he says. Therefore, God does not exist.
Are we simply material then?
Yes, we don't have bodies, we are bodies. Until 50,000 years ago, there were 4 other kinds of biped, humanoid, not unlike us, still living on the planet, died leaving no descendants. We're the only survivors of those people. That family were the last. We don't know if they had gods or not.
So you think the inexplicable...
No religion ever invented appears to have known that these creatures even existed, because the religious are forced to believe that the only really significant event that happened in the human story happened about 3,000 years ago.
We're just meat, that's all. Descendants of meat that left no descendants, Hitchens says. That's pretty elegant, don't you think?
Oh.